Hello, good evening, everyone. So welcome to our meetup session today on governance in GenAI landscape. So today's session will be hosted by Mr. Jeremy Adamson, who is a leader in AI and analytics strategy and has a broad range of experience in aviation, energy, financial service, retail, and public administration. Jeremy is the Vice President of Business Intelligence at Steel Auto Group, an instructor in corporate strategy at the University of New Brunswick, and the author of Minding and Machines and with Greek's Empathy. So I would like to introduce DataCouch now. I hope everybody can see my screen. So let me introduce you to DataCouch. DataCouch is a professional service company which is delivering the specializes in agile, data, cloud, DevOps, generative AI, data science-based consulting, implementation, and training. We provide browser-based lab solutions and managed services and are leaders in technologies like generative AI, blockchain, NFTs, streaming analytics, AR, VR, cybersecurity, drones, and many more. So we have transformed over 150K professionally globally through various technologies, primarily focusing on Web3, generative AI, big data, DevOps, and cloud. Our footprints include collaboration with Fortune 500 organizations, including GSIs like Infosys, Accenture, and TCS. We believe in sharing knowledge with the community and have created 3 meetup groups. First one is AI Mind Groups, second one is All Things Data, and then Generative AI User Group Pune. Each of these communities have over 150K members. So far, we have conducted over 200 meetup sessions, covering more than 100 technologies. Moving forward, our recent achievements include being recognized by Confluent as a global educational partner of the year in a second in a year row, becoming the first training delivery partner for Starburst, Brinka, OneHouse. We have created different learning paths for generative AI based on the job roles and various personas. So moving forward, if you want to know any other information about DataCouch, you can contact us at hello@datacouch.io. Moving on, I would like to introduce you to Mr. Jeremy Adamson, who will take over the session from now. Jeremy, you can take over the session and you can start this.
Thank you. Once you unshare, there we go. All right. So I think, yeah, there we'll begin there. So yeah, first off, really appreciate the invitation by DataCouch and to Harpreet for helping to organize this. I absolutely love the opportunity to participate in these types of community events and meet folks in the practice. Just very briefly in terms of introduction, I won't go into a lot of detail here. Harpreet covered a lot of it already, but just did want to call out that my social media accounts are listed on my website. If what I discussed today is of interest to you or something that you're focused on, please do reach out. I love to collaborate with peers and share notes on what works and what doesn't, and meet lots of folks. In terms of my background, just to give my point of reference, like Harpreet mentioned, I've worked in a lot of different industries in aviation, financial services. Right now, my focus is in retail, a lot of consulting. And within those different industries, I've worked with a lot of different business functions as well. I've been in marketing and operations and strategy and HR, and always acting really as that intermediary or translator between the business and the technology function. And that's informed most of my career and inspired the books that Harpreet mentioned, Minding the Machines, which talks a lot about building and leading high-performance data and analytics teams. And then Geeks with Empathy, my most recent, which talks an awful lot about human factors and how technology workers can stand out in their careers. And where I'm going to focus today is on painting a little bit of a picture of the state of the practice and how generative AI has, I would say, supplanted or at least augmented the attention that traditional AI was getting as a business focus, and how we as technology workers and practitioners can adapt to be able to best execute these projects with a sharp focus on cross-functional governance. So within my time in the practice, I've held, personally a lot of different titles. The groups that I've led and worked with have had a lot of different titles. My first role in this field was actually with a group called Decision Support Systems, who reported up to strategic projects. Right now, the team I lead is called Business Intelligence. Prior to that, I was with a group that was just called Intelligence. One organization I was working with, I joined to lead their analytics team. 18 months later, we were rebranded as Advanced Analytics without any real change in, the sophistication of what we were working on. And I always get the question when I'm working with new clients, what's the difference between these different subfields? And I think that that's something that we as practitioners really love to discuss as well. And we all have a bit of a mental map on who does what in these different areas. So we know, what a data architect does, what a data engineer does. We know their tooling. We have a sense of what their personality is like and their communication style as we're working together. And even within the different subfields, we have a sense of, what's data mining, deep learning, artificial intelligence, business intelligence, and so on. And many of us have put together many of these Venn diagrams, like you see at the top right. And we all want to be the definitive word and the thought leader on how these different pieces play together. And then individually, underneath that, I find a lot of us really love to pick up these credentials. We have a mentality of credentialism, and we collect these like badges. We'll go get Snowflake training, we'll get AWS training, and we stack our LinkedIn and our resumes with all of these little evidences of experience and qualification. And that's all well and good. That's one of the things that I absolutely love about working in this field. But what it also does is it takes us away from how we actually add value to the organizations that we serve. When we're focused on, who's a data analyst and who's a data architect and who's a data scientist versus an analyst, we start to hyper focus on what we do day to day, and that removes us from what we do for the organizations that we serve. Because for most of us in legacy organizations, nobody is buying your product or your service because you're on GCP versus AWS, or you're on Snowflake, or you're using XGBoost versus some sort of fancy ensemble technique. All that matters at the end of the day is that we help people to make decisions. So we might be moving data from A to B if
बंद
we're
कर रखना चाहिए जाने के टाइम तुम बोलो बंद नहीं करती हो अरे
sorry,
जितना मेरे
Praveen,
में
your
दम है
question?
मैं करती हूँ मैं क्या करूँ बाहर से नहीं होता है मेरे से बंद
Sorry for the participants. If you guys can mute yourselves. Sorry about that. I just got some crosstalk there. What we need to distill down, the work that we do is that we help people to make decisions. So if we're moving data from A to B, that needs to, at the end of the day, enable quicker, more effective decision making. If we're building reports nobody uses, we haven't created value, we've destroyed value because we've wasted time that could be spent on other things. So I think as a grounding statement and as a base principle, we need to align that the way that we support businesses, whether traditional AI or generative AI, is helping people to make decisions. And if we can do that, if we can say that that is our role in these organizations, we also need to acknowledge that we haven't been overwhelmingly successful with that. I've got a study here focused on North America, but I imagine it's universal. Every organization believes that using traditional AI, generative AI, is a key strategic differentiator, and it's necessary to being competitive in the future. We're also finding that we haven't been successful on the execution side. And I think the stat that most people in the practice are familiar with is that 85% of analytics projects are ending in failure. And that was from a Gartner 2017 study. Even the most optimistic one I could find was a study by Fast Company, and they saw a 50% failure rate. So even if we take the most optimistic one and say that we're failing to execute 50% of the time, I think that that's a giant red flag. We wouldn't accept that from any other business unit, but it's become par for the course in analytics. And what I've found in my career is that executives, that they see these higher failure rates. But when you talk to the individual practitioners, they'll say, no, I did exactly what I was told. I'm a data engineer. I moved the data from A to B. I have a 100% success rate. And it's that miscommunication between the folks in the business who wanted support with making decisions and the people that we work with and probably us ourselves who say, no, my role was to move the data and I did that successfully. So that miscommunication is leading to an awful lot of churn in the organizations that we work with. And this is what I've been working on really for the past 5+ years is helping technology practices look beyond the technology and to see their role as informing strategy, process, and people. We need all four of those working together if we're going to add value to organizations. And that's the backdrop we're working against. And those pain points are still out there. They're crystal clear. Those haven't been addressed. That's where, most organizations, especially legacy organizations, are focused is on extracting the most value from their investments in the analytics practice. And then against that backdrop, 18 months ago, of course, we see the staggering rise of generative AI. And I won't go into detail on these graphs. They all pretty much look the same. When ChatGPT came on the scene a year and a half, 2 years ago, overwhelming enthusiasm. Number of searches, number of people adopting new technologies, trying out the tool. Everybody's heard the statistic that it's the quickest adoption of a new technology in human history. Overwhelming enthusiasm for it. And for the first time in my memory, especially for legacy organizations, we're not having to knock on people's doors to drum up work. Executives are pushing for adoption. Investors are demanding participation from the companies that they're investing in. Boards are demanding that senior executives are showing that they're implementing and executing strategies around generative AI. Bloomberg did a great study counting the number of organizations that were mentioning AI in different earnings seasons. Wall Street Zen did an awesome study on this where they looked at transcriptions of earnings calls for publicly traded companies in the United States in the first half of 2023. And what they found is just simply mentioning AI raised your share price 2.5 points above people in your category who didn't mention AI. So just using the word increases the perceived value of your organization. But at the same time, if you zoom in on that, what you'll find is really a little bit scary. If you look at the top of the list, NVIDIA, who really powers generative AI, it stands to reason that they're going to discuss it. 1 hour phone call, they mentioned AI 150 times. So basically every 30 seconds, NVIDIA is talking about AI. Makes sense, again, perfectly justified. But if you scan the list a little deeper, Sherwin-Williams, they make paint and home improvement products. They mention AI about once a minute. Lamb Weston, the largest maker of French fries in the United States, they mention even more than Sherwin-Williams, just about every 45 seconds in their earnings call. Hershey's, the chocolate bar company. So a lot of enthusiasm for it, certainly, but a lot of companies who are trying to really reorient themselves around this new technology and create AI-enabled products that, frankly, don't make an awful lot of sense. So, McKinsey said that generative AI can add $3 trillion to the US economy, and I certainly can't dispute that. But most of that is probably going to be realized by OpenAI, by Microsoft, by NVIDIA. It's not going to be the French fry and chocolate bar companies. So all that to say, we really need to have a good understanding of the use cases for this, especially in legacy organizations. Digital natives, different story, but when we are representing the practice in organizations, we need to be very mature in how we articulate that. And we're also seeing that the growth has started to slow in this. The website visitors continue to grow for ChatGPT, but it is starting to drop off. That growth has already hit its inflection point, and the time spent on the platform is in decline as well. And the main argument to that, of course, is that there's a lot of different alternatives out there. People can be using different LLMs. But even if you look at the daily active users in the study by Sequoia Capital, AI first companies, they don't have nearly as much stickiness as digital incumbents. ChatGPT, only 14% of the user base are using it daily. And if you look at the 1 month retention, we're at about 56% as of last year. So that's not at all to take away from the opportunities here. This is huge business opportunities, but we need get you again there. We need to just be mature in what we are, recommending on this. So that's the landscape we're working against. We have those legacy of communication issues and mutual understanding between the analytics function and the business. And against that, we've seen the introduction of a new technology that we are trying to govern. So there's a lot of complexity with that. And the biggest theme here is that this certainly has immense potential. I can't take away from that. There's undeniable benefit with generative AI. Off the shelf, we can automate a lot of the activities in marketing, content generation for our social teams, synthesizing massive amounts of information for folks in executive roles and knowledge management roles. But for our part, as practitioners, we need to see our role not as just delivering an immediate win on a specific use case, but on realizing the maximum benefit of the technology over its entire lifespan. That's complicated, of course, by the fact that executives don't understand the limitations, and investors and boards are demanding and expecting immediate lift on this. Complicated again by the fact that people in the public, the end users of all this, the perception changes wildly between anxiety and exuberance. So on a Monday, we might see in the newspapers that generative AI is going to lead to universal basic income and it's going to transform the world for the better. And then, later on in the week, we might see newspaper articles about how it's taking jobs and it's going to lead to massive unemployment. So for our part, again, as the experts in the room, we need to manage the executive and the public expectations and be really clear about what these tools are actually doing. And then both of those are complicated by the third point, which is that for the most part, we are technology oriented. We got into this field because we love computers, we love technology, we enjoy what it does and not what it can do. So again, going back to that original point, we see our role as building models. We see our role as moving data from A to B. We don't see it as helping people make decisions and helping to meet customer needs. So again, for us as practitioners, we need to reorient our thinking and see our role as helping people make decisions and meet those needs. And for the rest of the talk, I'm just going to go into some, concrete ways that we can do that. And the first one, and I think the quickest win is to separate what's cool from what's valuable, to make sure that everything we're doing is oriented towards organizational goals and the mandate of the companies that we work with. So we are undeniably at the peak of inflated expectations. Gartner puts out their annual hype cycle, looking at it for emerging technologies for last year. Peak of inflated expectations. At the absolute peak of that curve is generative AI. I'm sure we're going to come into this trough of disillusionment. There's a lot of cool things it can do, but does it add business value? There's a question mark for a lot of those use cases. I'm quite fortunate that people reach out to me on social media quite often with ideas around business opportunities for generative AI. But a lot of those are, if you sit with the idea, if you just interrogate it as a potential customer, as a user, can be immediately discredited. In some cases, they're dangerous and really hyper personalized. My role right now is in automotive retail. So I had someone reach out recently and say that they had an idea for a use case using generative AI. It would recommend the next best vehicle for a person. So the idea was you would go to OpenAI, you would type in, you know, the last few vehicles that you've owned, and it would spit out the next vehicle that you should purchase. And that completely misunderstands the North American concept of a vehicle. A vehicle, for people in Canada and the US in particular, represents freedom. It represents an aspirational purchase. It's not just a way to get to work, it's a way to express who you are as a person. It represents where you're at in your life. It represents your values based on the brand that you choose. So a lot of people spend years, sometimes decades, thinking, when I hit this personal milestone, I'm going to buy this vehicle with this level of trim. They're watching videos of it on YouTube. They're test driving it a few times. They're doing a lot of research. It's this long personal journey. It's something you discuss with your friends and your family that, I really want to own a Mercedes GLS someday. And when I reach director, I'm going to buy that vehicle. And when you finally get the keys in your hand, it's that huge cathartic feeling. And to try to reduce that down into a pre-engineered prompt that, ChatGPT is going to tell you to go out and get a Honda CRV, that completely takes away all the romance from it. And for someone to pay $2 to get that insight just really makes no sense. And, another one, recommending a neighborhood in a new city. Again, a lot of people are moving around more often than they used to, but the way that this is trained is on newspaper articles, and newspaper articles necessarily write about feel-good stories for gentrification. So if you try this out, and it's easy to test, if you try it out for any city that I've tested it with, it always recommends the neighborhoods that are gentrifying, which is code word for presently dangerous. So, just not a good use case. And again, not something you would pay to use. And then the last thing from a purely business perspective is that all of these are a very thin application that's built onto an existing model. So there's no competitive moat with this at all. If you think of when the iPhone first launched, of course, people didn't anticipate that you could use the flash on the back of the phone for anything other than illumination for photographs. So one of the first apps that came on the Apple store was an LED app. You pay your $2, click the button, and it illuminates the back of the phone, use it for a flashlight. But a couple months later, Apple made that part of the default functionality. So, nothing against these people. They're harvesting while the sun's out. It's an exciting time. You can get investors for a lot of these. But at the end of the day, there's no value in these use cases. So again, we as practitioners, we need to be suggesting projects that are defensible and that actually add value to the organization and align with the mandate of the organization. If you look at mature AI organizations, this was a study out of Gartner, most of them are evaluating the success of their investments in generative AI as improvements in customer experience and improvements in cost efficiency. But if you look at the less mature AI organizations, so those that don't have a good handle on their technology practice, they're linking their success to top line growth effectively, improvements in revenue, and they're trying to transform their businesses around AI. So you think of Sherwin-Williams, they might come up with an AI-enabled or an AI-generated paint based on some sort of analysis they did. And that's great. That's interesting. But you're only going to buy that once, and it's going to lose its shine really quickly. If you think of an AI chocolate bar, French fry, there's only so much you can do with that. And again, it's going to be cool once, but people aren't going to keep coming back to it. So there's definitely something we can learn by the fact that those that are best in class are using this to improve their cost efficiency. They're not reorienting their business around it. There's so many tools that are out there off the shelf that can develop low value copy material for social media, improving the productivity of our development team, HR with writing job descriptions. There's a lot we can do today, augmenting processes we already have in place. We don't want to do that as practitioners. We want to be working on the cool stuff, but that adds immediate value and that improves cost efficiency and it improves customer experience. And those are the things that we should be tackling, not trying to reorient our entire business around this. When we focus on these unique transformational applications, we don't have a basis of success to work across. And in a lot of cases, we're letting our animal spirits get ahead of us. When that cool factor fades away and we've inherited this process that, presupposed a certain customer perspective, we're going to find that we're in a bit of a bad place. Another one that people have reached out to me about recently was prescription interactions. And again, at least in North America, when you go to get a prescription filled at a pharmacy, you're going to get a printout that says there's a potentially fatal interaction with these other medications. So please be careful before you do that. There's a product out there already. It's free. This doesn't add any value. And the risk, if you get it wrong, is the death of your customers. It is completely indefensible from a business perspective. So life coach, parenting advice, legal and tax advice, maybe 20 years in the future, some of those will make sense, but I'm not going to ask OpenAI for advice on how to parent my kids. And I would be terrified of anybody who actually is. So again, we just need to tamp down our enthusiasm for this and sit with that as a human, look at that as a potential business opportunity and say, does this make sense? When we sit around the boardroom table, there's going to be a lot of voices, there's going to be a lot of enthusiasm. And when they turn to us and say, does this make sense? We need to, again, be the voice of reason in the room. So again, just in summary, the commercial application of anything to do with generative AI needs to be aligned to business metrics. And if they don't contribute to that, improved revenue, reduced cost, or improving customer experience, it's not going to stand up to scrutiny and it's not going to be there for the long term. So everything that we do needs to be focused on value. The other piece is that we always need to be putting people first and to understand what can happen to our organizations and us as practitioners if we pursue continued depersonalization. And I think, again, an important place to begin is that all of this really is governed by cultural forces. That's what stimulates the demand. We in the practice are overwhelmingly technology determinists. We think that technology enables, that gets executed, and hopefully there's a market for it. And that's a vast generalization. That's not true for everybody on the call, but most people that I've worked with in the field have that embedded mentality, which stands to reason because the technology is what we love. It's what brought us into this field. But one of the coolest ways to look at that is to even look at the history of the
நான் ஏதாவது பண்ண முடியும்.
sorry.
தங்க என்ன சாப்பிடுவீங்கன்னு சொல்லு.
There we go. Again, for the audience, if you could keep muted, unless you have a question, please do feel free to hop in. One of the coolest ways to look at that again is comparing the history of the practice from a technology perspective to a historian or sociology perspective. And I've got a study here by Francisconi, which talked about different AI winters in the history of our practice. And this was a very technology-focused study where they looked at the drop-off in investment and research in the 70s and then in the late 80s. And what this study talks about, of course, is that, back in the 70s, interest dried up. We were focused mainly on symbolic logic, and then the development of backpropagation and neural networks led to a renewed interest in the field. And, I certainly can't take away from that. That's a massive development. But if you look at what was happening in society at the time, the movies that were playing were Blade Runner, Star Wars, and Alien. We were a very future-focused society at the time. It was the peak of the Cold War, and at least in the US, Reagan was talking about shooting Soviet missiles out of space with the SDI initiative. It was a very interesting and scary time, and no one was sure what the future was going to look like. And that's what led to greater interest and greater investment in this. So neural networks enabled, certainly, but it was the societal interest. In the late 90s, same thing. If you ask a technology person, they'll say, well, hardware got cheap enough, hard drives were cheap, price per gigaflop came down, advancements in ML, so there was more interest, more capability. Certainly true, that enabled it. But societal interest, again, was very future focused at that time. We had a Tamagotchi in our pockets. We had the DARPA challenge. We started getting Roombas. We were talking about, robots doing menial task force in the future. And the reason I bring this up again is that we need to expand our aperture and not just look at the technology, but look at what's happening in society. Because regardless of how advanced the tooling and the technology gets, it's going to be the public perception of that technology that determines continued investment in this area. And with that in mind, rather than asking the question whether or not we can do something, because more and more, the answer to that is yes, we should be asking if we should do this project. And we need to look at these from an accountability perspective, risk and ethics, and look at public relations. And this shouldn't fall entirely to the technology practice and certainly not to individual data scientists, but we need cross-functional support and overall governance to answer these questions before we start to talk about these projects. In terms of accountability, again, we need to know how sensitive all of this is to cultural shifts and whether or not that's consistent across our different geographies. So in the US and even in Canada right now, we have huge struggles between left-wing and right-wing parties. One of those parties could very easily, using Donald Trump, for example, who, is trying to promote the interests of blue-collar workers. The Republican Party in the US could say, we don't believe in generative AI. It's going to take jobs away from blue-collar workers, so we are the anti-AI party. Now you've lost 49% of your potential clients down there. And if you look at a company like Hershey's, who wants to say they have AI-enabled chocolate bars, or Lamb Weston or Sherwin-Williams, these companies are reorienting themselves. All of a sudden, you've got a sticker on your product that says AI-enabled French fries. 49% of your customers are now, not going to buy those French fries on moral grounds. Risk is another one. You can very easily run into PR issues just based on your vendor. And from a PR perspective, we're vicariously exposed based on those vendors that we choose to deal with. So if, again, we decide to use, Grok versus Gemini, for example, both of those have embedded bias in how they work and based on how they were trained. Both appeal to very different ends of the political spectrum. But if we choose to use Google Gemini to underpin all of our generative AI work, however well-intentioned that bias might be, that bias comes through in our final product. Grok, same thing. If we're using xAI and Elon Musk's platform, that's going to upset Democrats, and some of the inherent bias in that is going to be propagated in the tools that we put together. So it's not enough to look at it from a accuracy perspective or how often is this going to hallucinate or what have you. We need to look at it from a PR perspective and decide whether or not the values of the organizations that we're working with aligns with our own, because it's going to come through in what we do. So again, we need to look a little wider than just the technology and involve people from marketing and communications and legal to see what their perspective is in all of this. We also need to acknowledge that the roulette ball hasn't landed. We don't know in North America exactly what regulations are going to look like in the AI space. In Canada, where I live and most of my consulting practice is based, we have Bill C-27 and a companion document called the AIDA. And it's been in our house. It's been discussed for the past couple of years. We still have no certainty on what it's going to look like, but the parts that have been articulated say that at some point in the future, there's going to be an incoming AI minister who's going to monitor companies for compliance and order audits. So we don't know what those audits are going to look like. We don't know what compliance looks like. We do know that there's going to be criminal prohibitions for what they call the reckless use of AI, which is a legal term, which again wasn't defined. So we don't know what is reckless, but we also know that there's going to be provincial supplementation. So different parts of Canada are going to have different laws in this area. So as the organizations I work with are making decisions on where to invest in this area, they don't know exactly, again, how it's going to play out legally, and they might find themselves on the wrong side of the law. The analogy I use is it's like building an apartment building and you don't know what the building codes are, but you know that 5 years from now, a building inspector is going to come by and say, well, you don't have enough windows, you don't have enough exits, you don't have enough setbacks, you got to tear down this entire building. And that should be absolutely terrifying for a business trying to invest in this space. But a lot of them are just, covering their eyes and they're hoping for the best. So absolutely terrifying to invest in a space you have no idea if it's even going to be legal at the end of the day. In the United States, it's a little bit better. They have the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. You have general sense of how things are going to play out. But again, they have dozens of state-specific laws. In the European Union, a lot more guidance. It's very strict. It's very focused on consumer protections, but at least you know what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. So there's a lot more confidence in the business community over there of what you can invest in and what's completely offside. So really scary place, especially in Canada, when you're trying to focus. So again, with such a fluid environment, we really need to take a human-centric approach in all of the projects that we decide to work on. And when in doubt, always make sure that the projects we're working on are helping people. Again, they are automating tasks. They're making sure that we're focused on value for our customers and not just, seeking to gouge them, essentially. And again, when in question, we need to collaborate. We need cross-functional governance over these projects. It's not enough to look at these through a purely technical lens. We need to be working together. And then, in the interest of time, I get about 10 minutes left. We need to build a balanced portfolio. And a lot of this is, going back to those previous points, but really just to bring it home, we need to begin with the easy stuff. There is a lot of opportunity with those off-the-shelf products. But the high impact projects are the ones that are most attractive. When we sit around a boardroom table, we're ideating. Someone that suggests an AI-enabled paint or French fry, they're going to get more attention than a person that suggests, enabling GitHub Copilot to improve the productivity of your development team. That's not as glamorous, but it adds immediate value. On the flip side, all of those large transformational projects highly risky because, again, they're sensitive to changes in legislation, changes in the underlying LLM, the competitive environment, the political environment. We don't know if the technology is going to change before the end of the project. Finding the staff that's able to do custom LLM development and RAG models, very hard to find, very expensive. And we may find before the project ends that, going back to Gartner's hype cycle, we're now in the trough of disillusionment, and there's a loss of interest in this. It's not hot anymore. It's not cool. So our funding dries up before we can actually deliver on these projects. And I think most critically is that there's no foundation of credibility. If we jump immediately into these large transformative projects, we don't have any past success we can point to as evidence of our ability to execute. So again, we should always be trying to find the quick wins and to wait for the situation to play out before we start those larger projects. This isn't meant to be an endorsement of any of these products. They're just some that I'm familiar with, but some quick wins, some ways to augment what's already out there. Jasper, Copy AI. I've seen teams triple, quadruple the productivity of their social media teams using some of these tools, especially low value copy for social accounts. It's trivial to produce reams and reams of content for social media now. GitHub Copilot, same thing, code starters and accelerated development pipelines. The productivity gains for highly specialized and very expensive talent are there for the taking. We just need to basically flip a switch and start to use the tools that are out there. In HR, Textio HiredScore has been great for writing job descriptions and recommendations. We see a lot of productivity improvements with HR generalists if they're leveraging generative AI as well. So again, none of this is cool. It's not fun. It's simply flipping a switch, turning on software, but adds immediate business value. And going back to that grounding statement, helps people with their decision making, which is what people expect from us at the end of the day.
Sorry, Jeremy. There is a question in the chat. Can you please have a look?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Standard tool. That's a really good question. I'll read it for those that can't see it. We've been noticing global AI regulations and frameworks, but from a practical angle, do we have any standard tool to assess their ethical aspects? There's none that I'm familiar with, which is very unfortunate. Most clients that I'm working with are taking it case by case. And in Canada in particular, we just have no sense of how it's going to look at the end of the day. So we're taking it on the face of it, essentially. So if we're looking at something like a decision tool for financing, that's a case where the risk is just too high and we don't want to touch anybody by protected categories. So something like that, we're pausing. But when it comes to things that will improve customer experience, we can't imagine that ever being a negative. And we can't imagine anybody ever being upset as a customer about something like that. So we're just asking ourselves, and what I'm encouraging clients to ask themselves is, does this elevate the customer experience? Does this elevate human dignity? And if the answer to those is yes, then we can proceed. But if there's any question at all about whether or not this is ethical, we need to pause that and focus on other things. So, it's case by case, unfortunately. There's probably tools out there, but nothing that I'm familiar with. So I appreciate the question, though. Thank you. And then the last one I want to talk about was a great study by McKinsey where they looked at technology teams and how they were tackling generative AI and what they were doing. And they broke it down really articulately into three groups. They called takers, shapers, and makers. And what they said was takers use APIs, they use off-the-shelf products, they take what's already out there, turn it into immediate business value. They said that shapers were the ones that took those existing models and did fine tuning or augmentation through RAG and what have you. And then makers were the ones that were building their own foundational models. And what they found, interestingly, was that 90% of legacy organizations should be takers. Take what's already out there, pull the value out of it. Of the remaining 10%, 90% of those have a valid use case for being shapers, fine tuning, using RAG augmentation. And the very less than 1% that's remaining are the makers. Those are the ones that actually can justify building their own foundational models. But interestingly, that's the inverse of what we as practitioners want to be doing. Most of us want to be doing the cool stuff. We want to build our own foundational models. At least we want to be fine-tuning and doing RAG models. And very few of us who have been in the field for a long time want to just, deploy another API and use off-the-shelf products. It's not fun. It's not exciting. So it's an inverse of what they suggest businesses should be doing. But unfortunately, again, going back to where we are from a perspective of traditional AI, 72% of us already have data management issues that are causing us not to be able to scale our traditional AI use cases. All sorts of reasons for that. We have issues with pre-processing. We don't have data governance in places. Data quality is so bad that we can't reconcile financial numbers between two different reports. If we honestly ask ourselves what we're capable of, we're probably not in a place where we can be shapers and makers for most legacy organizations. That's not a bad thing. That is, again, more evidence that we should invest in the practice. But rather than investing in these transformational opportunities, we should be focusing on getting our house in order, focus on PII, masking, cleaning, having a good data governance framework in place, building out our capabilities, hiring people that have a background in prompt engineering and integration with these LLMs. And then even organizationally, having a good change management practice in place and an operating model for our data and analytics teams. We have a little bit of time. There's a lot of enthusiasm out there. People want to move quickly. Boards and investors are demanding it. But we need to get our house in order again before we start to go down the path of trying to execute on these projects and realizing that we just don't have the foundation in place to be able to do so. So putting that together, again, we need to have the trust of our stakeholders. We need project delivery models and healthy data before we're able to do these large projects. And in the short term, we need to find those quick wins and to use this time to get the foundation in place, understand all of the dependencies, see how things are going to play out from a legislative perspective and a public perception perspective before we commit to these large transformational projects. So to put it all together, again, we are at a point of irrational exuberance, and every project that we work on needs to have a clear value proposition. We need to be very conservative in what we're working on and to build a coalition. It's not enough that we attack these from a technical perspective. We need marketing, we need legal, we need everybody at the table talking about this. It's not enough, again, for the board to come up with an idea, hand it over to us to execute. It's always been the case for traditional AI, and it's always been an issue there, but it's even more so an issue now as we're moving into generative AI. In the short term, start with the easy stuff, use those off-the-shelf products to build a basis of credibility and trust, and to use this time and to use the interest in our practice to invest in data quality and data governance and to focus on having those delivery models and operating models for our teams before we start to attempt those large transformational projects. So that's my time. Wanted to leave at least 10 minutes for questions, but I do want to do a plug for the book. Geeks with Empathy goes into a lot more detail on this, and my social media accounts are up here again. If this is of interest, please feel free to follow me. I'm quite active on LinkedIn, and I talk an awful lot about how to bridge the gap between the technology practice and functions within the business. So thanks again to DataCouch and to
Sorry,
Harpreet for the
there are
invitation.
sorry. Jeremy, there are a few questions in the chat. Can you please take them?
Yep, of course. So Shreya, what are some of the trends that we can see with GenAI in the marketing sector? What kind of guidance do the marketers need? A lot of what I'm seeing in that place is an extension of a voice of the customer program, and I absolutely love that use case. What I've seen in the past is marketing teams and marketing communications in conjunction will pull data from a lot of different sources. You will have quality notes from your customer care center. You will have potentially some Google reviews. You'll have some Yelp reviews. You'll have some feedback that has come through. And they will put that together, and an individual person will try to articulate what the themes are for the past month. So they'll say, it seems like we have quality control issues in manufacturing because all of the commentary is focused around this. The next month, those analysts will go through again and discuss. In a lot of cases, things fall between the cracks, and it depends on the subjectivity of one or two individual people in marketing to come up with those insights. When you feed all of that into an LLM, you can get really, really detailed on what the overarching themes are. And I've seen great success with clients that I've worked in elevating their voice of the customer program by using any sort of LLM. It's so easy to feed it in, to use an API, and to get insights that way. So if I was talking about marketing teams, I think that's the easiest and quickest win, is to build a case for a voice of the customer program and to use the data that you probably already have. How much of the enterprise structured data is getting used in GenAI use case? Structured data, I'm not sure that there's so much of a use case there compared to unstructured data. Traditional AI, when you're dealing with machine learning, absolutely beautiful opportunity to get more attention for that, because I have not found that any LLM that I've worked with has been strong with structured data. So if you feed it financial information and you ask it for some insights, it doesn't seem to give you as much as a financial specialist or an accountant could if you have that structured data in even a pivot table, Power BI, or whatever your visualization tool of choice is. That depends on specialized knowledge that I don't see LLMs having at the moment. But trawling through reams of unstructured data, that's where it really is at its strongest. What is the full form of COTS? Commercial off-the-shelf software. Apologies for that. So COTS is just off-the-shelf, things you can buy and deploy immediately. Great session. Thank you, DataCouch. Okay, I think that's all the questions. Appreciate it again, Harpreet. And if I missed anything, feel free to reach out anytime. Love to connect.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for this insightful session. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, participants, for joining the session. And if anyone missed anything, you can watch out the recording of the session on our YouTube channel. Additionally, you can follow us on LinkedIn. And for more details, you can reach out to hello@datacouch.io. If anyone have any questions, you can just reach out to the email I have mentioned. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jeremy. It was nice session from you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Everybody
much.
has a great night.
Oh, good night. Thank you.
Okay.